One Iranian drone costs to manufacture $20,000. One American Patriot missile to shoot it down, $4 million. Read those two numbers again, slowly, now keep listening. Iran is launching between 50 and 100 of these drones every single day, every day, without stopping, without rest, like a factory that never shuts off. Within just a few weeks of this war, the United States burned through the entire annual production of Patriot interceptor missiles. 1 full year of manufacturing output, gone. And here's what not a single news broadcast will tell you tonight. To refill that empty stockpile, the United States has been forced to do something that no general ever wants to do. It has been pulling weapons out of South Korea, out of Japan, and out of Europe. Those are the exact locations where American military assets were specifically positioned to stop China from taking Taiwan and to stop Russia from rolling further through Ukraine. In other words, one $20,000 Iranian drone has forced the most expensive military empire in human history to strip its armor off on two separate fronts simultaneously. Now, you might be thinking, okay, this is a Middle East problem. This is a problem for diplomats and generals. This has nothing to do with me. Stay with me. Because by the end of this video, you will understand why China is watching every single one of these drone flights with absolute undivided attention. And you will understand what that means for the rest of the world. Okay? Let us start from the foundation. Because this is the one thing that cannot be manipulated or spun or covered up by press releases. Mathematics. In any war in history, there are three factors that determine who wins and who loses. Economics, organization, and logistics. That is it. Nothing else. You can have the most advanced technology in the world. You can have the most patriotic soldiers. But if you lose on economics, organization, and logistics, you lose the war. Full stop. Now, Iran is fighting the United States on all three of those dimensions simultaneously. But not with nuclear weapons, not with aircraft carriers, not with the kind of military power that fills the Hollywood movies. Iran is doing it with cheap drones. And the problem is not simply the cost of each individual drone. The real problem, the one that is keeping generals awake at night in Washington, is the relationship between the rate of consumption and the rate of replacement. Let me explain what I mean. In the first few weeks of Operation Epic Fury, American and Allied air defense systems achieved an interception rate of 93% at bases in the UAE and 97% in Qatar. Now, when you hear those numbers, what is your instinct? Your instinct is probably, that sounds pretty good. 97%, almost perfect. Let that sit for a second. 97%. And America is still losing strategically. How is that possible? Here is how. Because even when only 3% of the drones get through, that 3% is still enough to destroy things that cannot be quickly or cheaply replaced. One Shahed drone that slipped through the defensive net destroyed an AN/TPS-59 radar system at a base in Bahrain. That radar was worth $300 million. Another drone hit an AN/FPS-132 early warning radar system in Qatar, a system valued in the billions of dollars. So think about the real equation here. Iran spends $20,000 on a drone. The drone gets shot down 97 times out of 100. But on that one time it gets through, it destroys $300 million of equipment. This is not a military problem. This is a math problem. And the math is working entirely in Iran's favor. But wait, it gets worse. Because even the 97% success rate comes with a price tag that is breaking the bank. Every single interception requires an expensive missile. And the United States is burning through those expensive missiles at a speed that the defense industrial base simply cannot keep up with. By the time we reached late April of 2026, the United States had already expended more than 2,000 air defense interceptor missiles and more than 1,100 long-range Tomahawk cruise missiles. The Pentagon itself has acknowledged that it will take years, not months, years, to replenish those stockpiles. Now let me ask you the question that I want you to hold in your mind for the rest of this video. Those Tomahawk missiles, those Patriot interceptors, what were they originally built for? They were not built to fight Iran. They were stockpiled specifically for the scenario where China makes a move on Taiwan, and now they are gone. The system that America designed, The most expensive military architecture in the history of civilization was built to fight a small number of large, decisive battles. It was never designed to absorb hundreds of small, cheap attacks every single day for months on end. That is not what the doctrine was built for. That is not what the procurement was built for. That is not what the training was built for. And Iran figured this out. They figured it out a long time ago. The Shahed drone program was not designed to win a conventional war. It was designed to exploit exactly this gap, the gap between the enormous cost of American defense and the impossible task of defending everything, everywhere, all at once. But here is the part that most news coverage is completely skipping over. And this is important, so I want you to pay close attention. The problem is not just that America is running low on ammunition. The deeper problem is what America has been forced to do in response to that shortage. Because when your stockpile is depleted, you only have two options. You either produce more, which takes years, or you take from somewhere else. And that is exactly what the Pentagon has been doing. Let me walk you through what has actually moved in the past few weeks. From South Korea, the United States has withdrawn Patriot missile batteries and THAAD, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System. These are the two primary shields that protect Seoul from North Korean ballistic missiles. Without them, the defensive posture of the Korean Peninsula has been significantly weakened. Additionally, MQ-9 Reaper surveillance drones stationed at Gunsan Air Base in South Korea have been ordered to redeploy to the Central Command Area of Operations in the Middle East. From Japan, 2,500 Marines stationed at Okinawa have been dispatched to the Middle East. The USS Warrior, a mine countermeasure ship docked at Sasebo Naval Base, has been pulled out. Two Marine Expeditionary Units, MEU-11 and MEU-31, which were responsible for Pacific Patrol rotations, have been removed from their rotation cycle entirely. From Europe, F-16 fighter jets from bases in Germany and Italy have been ordered to relocate to Jordan and surrounding areas. F-15 E-Strike Eagle squadrons and F-35As, based at RAF Lakenheath in England, have followed the same orders. And perhaps most telling of all, the RC-135 rivet joint aircraft, the specialized intelligence planes whose entire purpose is to monitor Russian military movements along NATO's eastern flank, have been redirected to Crete to focus on Iran instead. And then there is this number, $750 million. That is the amount the Pentagon has quietly redirected away from the priority urgent requirements list for Ukraine, a fund that NATO partners had contributed to in order to replenish its own depleted ammunition stockpile in the Middle East. So step back and look at what has just happened. Iranian drones launched from the shores of the Strait of Hormuz have not only emptied the skies above that waterway, they have simultaneously emptied the skies above Seoul, above Tokyo, above Warsaw, and above Kiev. Not a single bomb needed to fall on any of those cities. Not a single Iranian soldier needed to set foot anywhere near East Asia or Eastern Europe. The drones just needed to keep flying at Hormuz. And the logical, inevitable consequence of that pressure is that America has had to strip its defensive coverage from everywhere else. This is what strategists call force distribution under resource constraint. And it is one of the oldest vulnerabilities of any large empire. When you are everywhere, you are strongest nowhere. Now here is where things get genuinely interesting, and I want you to understand something before I go further. When we talk about NATO, most people think of it as a monolithic block. America says go, and everyone follows. That is not what we are seeing today. What we are seeing today is something that historians will probably spend a long time writing about. We are watching the alliance fracture in real time, not because of Russian pressure, not because of Chinese influence, but because of an Iranian drone strategy and the choices that Washington has made in response to it. Let me give you the specific facts. Spain refused to allow the United States to use two shared military bases, Rota and Morón, for operations connected to the Iran war. They also closed their airspace to American military aircraft conducting strikes against Iran. This is not a small thing. These are NATO bases. Spain is a NATO member, and they said no. France and Italy refused to grant American military aircraft access to their airspace for the same operations. Kaja Kallas, the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs, the person whose job it is to represent European foreign policy, said publicly and clearly, This is not Europe's war. Europe's war is in Ukraine. And Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, called American airstrikes on Iran illegal, not unwise, not counterproductive, illegal. Let that land for a moment. The closest ally America has on the European continent, the country whose capital gave us the Statue of Liberty, whose partnership with the United States goes back to the founding of the American Republic, publicly called American military action illegal. Now, what was Washington's response to all of this? The Pentagon drafted an internal memo exploring options to punish non-cooperative allies. The options under consideration included suspending Spain from key NATO positions and privileges, and separately, in what can only be described as a threat, internal emails discussed reconsidering American support for Britain's claim to the Falkland Islands as a form of punishment to reduce what one memo apparently called British complacency. Think about the logic here for a second. The United States is in the middle of a difficult war. Its ammunition stockpiles are depleted. Its military assets are stretched across multiple theaters. And in this moment, Washington's strategy for managing its alliances is to threaten its allies. This is not the behavior of a confident empire at the peak of its power. This is the behavior of an empire that is starting to feel the strain. And the allies are noticing. Denmark, one of the most loyal American partners in NATO, just made the largest arms procurement decision in its modern history. They chose the French-Italian SAM/T air defense system over the American Patriot. And the chairman of the Danish Parliamentary Defense Committee explained why in terms that should be read very carefully in Washington. He said, "Buying American weapons is a security risk that we cannot run." Let me repeat that. A NATO ally, a close American partner, just said publicly that purchasing American military equipment is a security risk. In Finland, a country that only recently joined NATO, specifically because it felt threatened and wanted American protection, trust in the United States, has now fallen to just 4%. 4%. That is approximately the same level of trust that Finnish people have in Russia and China. Think about what that means. Finland joined NATO to escape the Russian sphere, and now within months, trust in its American protector has collapsed to the same level as trust in the adversary it was trying to escape from. This is what a drone campaign in the Strait of Hormuz is doing to the Atlantic Alliance. Not through direct attack, not through military confrontation, but through the cascading consequences of resource depletion, mismanaged alliances, and the gradual erosion of credibility. Iran did not need to attack Europe. The math did it for them. And now we arrive at the layer that almost nobody in mainstream media is discussing. And I think this is the most important part of this entire analysis. Russia and China are not standing on the sidelines watching this war. They are actively fighting the United States, not with missiles, not with troops, not with anything that you can photograph or put on a map. They are fighting in the shadows, through mechanisms that are technically legal, diplomatically deniable, and strategically devastating. Let us start with Russia. American officials have confirmed, this is not speculation, this has been verified at congressional hearings, that Russia has been providing Iran with real-time satellite imagery and intelligence data, including the precise locations of American warships and aircraft operating in the region. What this means in practice is that every time an American F-15 or F-35 takes off from a base in Jordan, Tehran potentially knows its position before it reaches its target. Russia is effectively acting as Iran's intelligence officer in this war, and it costs Russia almost nothing. But Russia's gains from this conflict go far beyond intelligence sharing. Consider what has happened to the balance of forces in Europe. The Patriot systems that were supposed to protect Ukrainian cities and NATO's eastern flank have been diverted to the Middle East. Switzerland has just been informed that its order for 5 Patriot systems will be delayed by 5 years. 5 years. Because America needs those systems at Hormuz right now. This is a direct gift to Russia. Every Patriot battery that goes to the Middle East is one fewer Patriot battery standing between Russian missiles and European cities. And Russia did not have to do anything to make this happen. Iran's drones did it for them. And then there is the economic dimension. Before this war, Russia's federal budget was calculated on the assumption of oil at $60 per barrel. Today, with the Strait of Hormuz disrupted and 20% of the world's energy supply under pressure, Brent crude oil is sitting above $106 per barrel. That gap between $60 and $106 translates directly into billions of additional dollars flowing into Russian government coffers every single month. Money that funds the war in Ukraine. Money that buys more weapons, more ammunition, more time. Iran's drones, in other words, are indirectly financing Russia's war in Europe, without Russia contributing a single dollar to the effort. Now let us look at China, because this is where it gets particularly fascinating and particularly instructive about how great power competition actually works in the 21st century. When Trump confronted Xi Jinping about Chinese support for Iran, President Xi wrote back with a very clear, very firm denial. China, he said, is not providing weapons to Iran. And technically, that statement is true. The People's Liberation Army is not handing over Shahed drones or ballistic missiles to Tehran. There is no Chinese weapons factory producing military equipment with Iranian serial numbers. In that narrow, literal sense, Xi's denial holds up. But here is what is actually happening. On April 20th, the USS Spruance intercepted an Iranian container ship called the Tosca in the Gulf of Oman. The ship had just departed from Gaolan Port in Zhuhai in southern China. According to the Washington Post, Gaolan Port specializes in the loading and handling of sodium perchlorate, a chemical compound that has entirely legitimate civilian uses in fireworks and industrial applications. Sodium perchlorate is not a weapon. It is not classified as a weapon. It ships under civilian customs codes. It is also, when refined into ammonium perchlorate, the primary propellant in solid-fuel ballistic missiles. European intelligence assessments concluded that a single shipment of 1,000ths of this material from Zhuhai to the Iranian port of Bandar Abbas, a shipment that was documented in early 2025, contained enough chemical precursor to produce the propellant for between 200 and 260 ballistic missiles. 260 ballistic missiles from one container ship carrying chemicals that are legal to export under customs codes that classify them as civilian industrial materials. And when American officials confronted Beijing about the Tosca interception, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman responded with a statement that was technically accurate in every single word and completely misleading in its totality. He said that the vessel seized was a foreign container ship and that China rejects any false association and speculation. Nothing in that statement is literally false. No assembled missile was aboard. The PLA did not charter the ship. By Beijing's carefully curated definitions, which deliberately exclude dual-use chemical precursors from the category of weapons, the denial is airtight. This is how modern great power competition actually works, not through the kind of dramatic confrontations that make it onto the front page, not through carrier battle groups facing off in contested waters, but through container ships, customs codes, microenterprises in Shenzhen, with 3 registered employees shipping aerospace-grade radar altimeters under the category of automotive electronics, and chemical ports in southern China handling industrial compounds that happen to also be the building blocks of ballistic missile propellant. The Shahed drone itself is a perfect case study in this kind of layered, legally deniable supply chain. The drone does not carry Chinese markings, but the piston engine that powers it descends from a German design acquired by Chinese businessmen in 2011, with production relocated to Fujian province. The precision machining components, the aerospace-grade radar altimeters, the GPS antennas, the programmable logic chips, almost every input that allows a cheap drone to navigate to a specific LNG terminal in Qatar traces back to a Chinese industrial park and ships out under a civilian customs code. And while all of this is happening, while Russia provides the intelligence and China provides the industrial inputs, what is China doing strategically with the information it is gathering from watching this war unfold? The generals of the People's Liberation Army are studying every single engagement at Hormuz with extraordinary care. They are watching how American carrier strike groups respond to swarm tactics. They are watching how long it takes to exhaust Patriot interceptor stockpiles. They are watching what happens to American readiness in the Pacific when those stockpiles have to be replenished from assets deployed in Asia. And they are asking themselves one very specific question. If a drone campaign in the Strait of Hormuz can deplete American air defense capacity to this degree in a waterway that is 150 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, what would a similar campaign accomplish in the Taiwan Strait, which is less than 180 kilometers wide? That question is not hypothetical. It is the central operational planning question for the PLA right now. Okay, let me bring everything together now. One Iranian drone, $20,000. It does not sink an aircraft carrier. It does not occupy a city. It does not need to do any of those things. It just needs to fly, keep flying, day after day. 50 drones, 100 drones, wave after wave, until the interceptors run out, until the radar systems start going dark one by one, until the generals in Washington have to make the call that no general ever wants to make. Where do we pull from? And when they pull from South Korea, North Korea fires 10 ballistic missiles into the sea as a test, checking whether the umbrella is still there. When they pull from Japan, the Strait of Taiwan becomes a subject of PLA study sessions. When they redirect the Ukraine budget, Russian missile barrages continue without the air defense systems that might have stopped them. When they threaten Spain and Britain and question the value of their own alliances, Denmark buys French air defense systems, Finland's trust collapses to 4%, and the EU begins quietly drafting its own mutual defense framework that does not depend on Washington. No bomb needed to fall on Seoul. No missile needed to hit Warsaw. The drones at Hormuz did all of it, remotely, cheaply, and with a precision that no military planner on the Iranian side could have fully predicted. Here is the lesson. And I want you to really think about this, because I think this is the defining strategic insight of the 21st century so far. Cheap weapons do not need to win. They only need to make expensive weapons insufficient to defend everything at once. Read that again. Cheap weapons do not need to win. They only need to make expensive weapons insufficient to defend everything at once. And an empire, by definition, must defend everything at once. That is what makes it an empire. Its power is precisely its global presence. Its bases in 150 countries. Its carrier groups in every ocean. Its missile defense systems protecting allies across multiple continents. That presence is both the source of its strength and the source of its vulnerability. Because every asset deployed in one place is an asset that is not deployed somewhere else. And in a world where cheap drones can force expensive redeployments, the empire is always one sustained drone campaign away from a strategic overextension crisis. This is not a new problem. The Romans faced it along the Rhine and the Danube simultaneously. The British faced it when they tried to hold India, Egypt, and the Western Front at the same time. Empires always reach a point where the cost of maintaining the perimeter exceeds the resources available to sustain it. The question is never whether that point arrives. The question is only when and what triggers it. What we may be watching right now, and I want to be careful here because I do not make predictions with absolute certainty. I make predictions with a model that I constantly test and revise. What we may be watching is that trigger point. A $20,000 drone revealing the fundamental unaffordability of the American imperial project at its current scale, not because America is weak. America is extraordinarily powerful. But because the math of maintaining global supremacy when your adversaries have figured out how to attack you cheaply and asymmetrically is becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. And the people who understand this most clearly are not in Tehran. They are in Beijing and in Moscow, and they are not in a hurry. Because every day this war continues, the logic of the drone campaign becomes more powerful, not less. Every day, stockpiles in Asia and Europe get a little thinner. Every day, alliance trust erodes a little further. Every day, the question of what America is willing to defend and what it will eventually have to concede becomes a little more urgent. This war, in a very real sense, is not being fought over the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is just a location. The war is being fought over the question of whether the United States can continue to be the world's sole underwriter of global security, enforcing trade routes, deterring regional powers, guaranteeing the sovereignty of distant allies, when cheap drones have fundamentally altered the economics of that guarantee. And that is a question that no ceasefire, no peace deal, and no true social post is going to resolve. So, I want to leave you with one final thought, and then I have a question for you. Every great empire in history has believed, at some critical juncture, that it had solved the problem of military supremacy. The Romans believed their legions were invincible. The British believed their navy was unchallengeable. The Americans built the most sophisticated, most expensive, most technologically advanced military force the world has ever seen. And they believed, perhaps reasonably, that sheer technological superiority would be sufficient. What Iran has shown, and what Russia and China are quietly taking notes on, is that technological superiority can be neutralized not by matching it, but by exhausting it. You do not need a Patriot missile to defeat a Patriot missile. You need enough $20,000 drones to make every Patriot missile a liability. That is the world we are now living in. And the consequences of that world are going to extend far beyond the Strait of Hormuz. They are going to reshape how NATO thinks about its own survival, how Japan and South Korea think about their dependence on American security guarantees, how Taiwan thinks about the credibility of American deterrence, and how China calculates the timing of its own ambitions. One drone, $20,000. Flown by a country under maximum economic pressure, with its navy destroyed, its air force decimated, its power plants threatened. And it is still managing to reshape the strategic posture of the most powerful military in human history. Think about that for a moment. Now here is my question for you. Based on everything we have discussed today, the asymmetric economics, the NATO fractures, the Russian intelligence support, the Chinese supply chain, who do you think is actually winning this war right now? Comment Iran if you believe the drone strategy is successfully bleeding the American empire and the end game favors Tehran and its partners. Comment USA if you believe Washington is still controlling the strategic situation and has the resources and political will to bring this to a conclusion on its own terms. I read every single comment. And on Saturday, like we always do, I will go through your questions and push back on anything I think you have gotten wrong. Because that is the only way we actually learn, by testing our models against disagreement. Share this video with someone who needs to understand what is really happening right now. Not the headlines, not the press releases, the actual structural dynamics underneath all of it. I will see you in the next class.